Okay, sex cell development in females. The female reproductive system in mammals, in figure 1, I'll show that now. Okay, let's start in the upper left. We have the oviduct, the fallopian tube, the site of fertilization. An egg leaves the ovary and travels through the oviduct to the uterus. Then the uterus or womb, the organ in which the fertilized egg, the zygote, becomes embedded. Within the uterus, the zygote develops into an embryo, which develops into a fetus. There's a picture of the ovary, produces egg cells. Then the cervix, the muscular opening between the vagina and the uterus. It prevents the fetus from entering the vagina too early. There's the vagina or the birth canal. And then the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, that provides nourishment for the zygote and embryo. If the egg is not fertilized, the endometrium is shed during menstruation. Is more complicated than that of the male because it has an extra responsibility. Not only must the female produce sex cells, eggs, but she must also nurture the embryo once an egg is fertilized. Let's look at the structure of the egg. Like the sperm cell, the egg is well designed for its purpose. The female sex cell is much larger than the sperm, 100,000 times larger. And it is packed with nutrients so that when it is fertilized, it can divide rapidly. It is capable of building a barrier after fertilization to prevent sperm from entering. Unlike males who manufacture millions of sperm cells every day, human females usually develop only one egg at a time. Look at the chicken egg. Chicken egg has a yolk. And if you look up chicken egg and find out where is the embryo, the fertilized embryo of the fertilized chicken egg, you'll find that it's right on, it's very small, and it's right on the yolk. And the yolk is what is used for food by the developing chicken. So the egg in a human also has a supply for food. I just want to make a clarification. The egg cell, it's very small. It has only enough nutrients so that it can start dividing, but then when it implants itself in the uterine wall, in the endometrium, then it can have an alternate source of nutrients. The yolk from the chicken egg or any bird egg is the only source it has, that organism has, to develop from. So it's very different. It's an analogy, not an equation. Production and development of the egg. The primary reproductive organ of the female is the ovary. It is responsible for producing and developing egg cells. The ovary contains small groups of cells called follicles. The follicles are composed of two types of cells. A reproductive cell that produces the egg and nutrient-producing cells. The nutrient-producing cells provide energy-rich chemicals to the developing egg. Unlike the testis, the ovary does not generate new egg cells throughout adult life. The human ovary contains about 400,000 immature follicles at puberty, and the number continually decreases. Hundreds of the follicles begin to develop during each reproductive cycle. But usually only a single follicle is allowed to reach maturity in each cycle. And I'll show you that in figure 2 now. Okay, figure 2, the process of follicle development and ovulation. Let's begin with A. Nutrient-producing cells surround the egg cell. There's the egg cell. And then B, nutrient fluid collects. Then C, mature follicle pushes against the wall of the ovary. And then D, follicle ruptures. Then E, the egg cell is released. F, corpus luteum develops from follicle. The corpus luteum matures. And there's a picture of the primary follicles. So that's the cycle of the follicle development and ovulation. The other follicles that have been developing deteriorate and are absorbed into the ovary. It's recycled. As the follicle develops, the reproductive cell, which contains 46 chromosomes, undergoes meiosis. It forms one large, mature egg cell with 23 chromosomes, plus 3 tiny cells that disintegrate. Meanwhile, nutrient cells surround the egg-producing cell have been dividing to nourish the future egg. The nutrient cells surrounding the egg cell develop into a fluid-filled cavity. When the egg is ready, the ovary wall bursts and the egg cell is released into the oviduct. The release process is called ovulation. Nutrient cells that remain within the ovary are transformed into a tissue called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum secretes hormones essential for pregnancy. If pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates after about 10 days, and the cycle that leads to ovulation begins once again. Pregnancy. Pregnancy means fertilization has taken place. The oviduct moves the egg toward the uterus, the organ responsible for nourishing an embryo as it grows. If the egg has been fertilized by a sperm cell while moving through the oviduct, the zygote, the fertilized egg, the zygote begins to divide by mitosis, becoming an embryo. The embryo embeds into the thick lining of the uterine called the endometrium. The endometrium supports the developing embryo. If the egg is not fertilized, the endometrium is shed in a process called menstruation. The role of hormones. In females, at puberty, the pituitary gland in the brain secretes 2 hormones, FSH and LH, which stimulate the change that take place in the female's body. During puberty, external and internal reproductive organs develop their mature form, and development of follicles can begin. Estrogen. FSH also triggers the development of follicle cells in the ovary. Let's look at figure 3. Figure 3
The hormone FSH stimulates the development of the follicle cells in the ovary. It begins with the brain, and deep in the brain, the pituitary gland, you have the LH and the FSH coming out. And you can see that the ovary is pointed out. The egg and hormone producing organ is the ovary. And the top right, FSH stimulates follicle cells to secrete estrogen. And there's the follicle cell and the egg. LH causes ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum. And there's a picture of the corpus luteum. And that's figure 3. The hormone FSH stimulates the development of follicle cells in the ovary.
As they develop, they begin to secrete another hormone called estrogen. Estrogen is released into the blood and carried to the cells of the body. In the uterus, estrogen encourages the endometrium to thicken in preparation for the zygote. As the follicles develop, estrogen concentrations in the blood increase. Progesterone. Once the follicle cell begin to develop, LH is released into the blood. LH causes ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum. That's in figure 3. Let's look at that for a moment again.
Figure 3, the hormone FSH stimulates the development of the follicle cells in the ovary. It begins with the brain, and deep in the brain, the pituitary gland, you have the LH and the FSH coming out. And you can see that the ovary is pointed out. The egg and hormone producing organ is the ovary. And the top right, FSH stimulates follicle cells to secrete estrogen. And there's the follicle cell and the egg. LH causes ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum. And there's a picture of the corpus luteum. And that's figure 3. The hormone FSH stimulates the development of follicle cells in the ovary.
The corpus luteum secretes both estrogen and another hormone called progesterone. Progesterone continues to stimulate the development of the endometrium and prepares the uterus for an embryo. In addition, progesterone inhibits further ovulation. If no embryo is embedded in the endometrium, the corpus luteum stops making estrogen and progesterone. The endometrium stops developing and instead begins to break down. Menstruation starts and a new set of follicles can develop in the beginning of the next reproductive cycle. Let's look at, this was a little bit long, so let's look at, there's some understanding concepts here. It says, where are egg cells produced? You should know that. What is the site of fertilization? Where does fertilization occur? In which structure does the embryo develop? What are the two types of follicle cells found in the ovary? Explain the function of each of the cell types. Describe ovulation. And number 6, how is the corpus luteum formed? Explain its function. Making connections. It's always good. If the ovaries of a woman are removed, would she be able to give birth to a baby? Support your answer. And 8, ectopic pregnancies occur when the embryo becomes implanted in the oviduct. rather than the uterus. Speculate about some of the difficulties that would be experienced by such a pregnancy. Have a nice day.